So some niche program about John Cleese ranting about the youths and the arguments that he's got on the Bird app. That's not good. Why would the BBC commission this shit? You know that it's going to be terrible. That's why GB News have commissioned it, and the BBC said, no, we don't want to touch it. So it's literally just Old Man Yells at Cloud the musical, really, at this point. No one's tuning into Talk TV on their Freeview box. They're watching actual entertainment programming on the other channel. But what they are doing is gaining viewership from people who are frantically on YouTube wanting to get angry about the latest woke things, the flavour of the day as far as the algorithm is concerned. So John Cleese is a British comedian. If you're an American watching this for some reason, you have no idea who John Cleese is. Well, we're going to learn you a thing today. Famous for a very long time. He's quite old now. Big famous for making comedy programs 70s and 80s. And he's gone on an anti-woke crusade. I've done a video of him previously where he stormed off the BBC set for being probed on his very weird old man yells at cloud style opinions, because he really has become like peak reactionary boomer, so much so that even Eric Idle was saying in interviews that, maybe he should just be quitting doing this stuff and just be curling up on his sofa in front of the fire. And maybe he'll be maybe a little bit happier rather than just getting angry. But no, unfortunately, he's doubled down now. He's had to double down. After 3 years away from our screens, he's got a new program. And his new program is with GB News, noted noted copy of Fox News, but British style. You put Union Jack on it, do exactly the same thing, get funding from similar places. I mean, not Murdoch, but might as well be at this point, to be honest. Yeah, he's super fucking reactionary now. But I digress. He's joined GB News because he believes they're a free speech channel because he'll get cancelled if he goes anywhere else. So I've got a lot to say about this particular issue, but he's done an interview on GB News about his new show, which we're going to watch first, and then we'll have some commentary on the things that he said on social media as well.
We're going to crack on this third section with Tuesday's Guardian, bringing us a story about a major development here at GB News.
Yes, John Cleese to host GB News show as he rails against cancel culture, and he's quoted people at GB saying that people say it's a right-wing channel, it's actually a free speech channel, which of course is true, but you wouldn't know that.
I mean, it's definitely not a right-wing channel. The one which has done like multiple segments about how they want the NHS to be turned private, when, by getting people from the Institute of Economic Affairs and people like Darren Grimes on, people with vested interests in ensuring that they continue to be having a right-leaning political slant on the channel, whilst also being funded by a hedge fund boss who also has shares in private healthcare companies. That's a bit weird, don't you think it is? I wonder why they have such a right-wing hue, especially on economic issues, right? Like, obviously, they're very reactionary as well on a kind of social scale or whatever, if you want to talk about this in kind of political compass terminology. But even if you're just looking from an economic perspective, they're incredibly right-wing. The fact that, there's people on the channel who just say the real enemy is the Labour Party. Like, at what point then do you say, well, hang on, if like, obviously the Labour Party are still right-wing, but if you're to the right of the Labour Party where it is now under Starmer, then, how can you claim to be anything other than a right-wing channel? Like, maybe you are a quote-unquote free speech channel because you'll platform people that people don't want to listen to. Sure, maybe you can call yourself the quote-unquote free speech channel. Whatever, fill your boots, I don't care. The rest of us, we want quality programming and not just people saying whatever shit comes to their mind, no matter how offensive. But anyway.
If you went on Twitter today, you had all sorts of reactions. This Femi was saying, I used to adore you, John Cleese. Your parody of Hitler was so good, but now you're siding with the far right Ofcom regulated channel.
Absolutely insane. I mean, there is a kind of...
yeah, like, there's been people on the far right who've passed Ofcom regulations. Like, Nick Griffin was on Question Time. Actually, what funny story about that, even though he got humiliated on Question Time, the BNP membership still dramatically increased after that programme, showing that it doesn't matter how well you beat people in these debates, they still at least use their platform to get their own additional added platform. Right? Just platforming in the first place expands their reach. Unless they had loads of reach to begin with, then you might as well debate them because you want to try and be able to turn people around who've already been exposed. But that's a pretty large digression. Isn't GB News like super right wing? It's like Newsmax vibes. Oh, 100%, 100%. I think it's more Fox News than Newsmax because it's more corporate. It's less. I mean, it is quite conspiratorial though, because they've had like anti-vaxxers on the show and shit like that. They've always been explicitly kind of anti-lockdown, and they've never really had, like, Fox is less partisan than GB News is, for sure.
hysteria that won't go away among certain people on Twitter, people like Femi, who have bought into this myth that GB News is this far-right thing, and it just isn't true.
And they've never watched it.
No.
We're regulated by Ofcom. We try and be very...
Okay, well, I've watched plenty of it because I've reacted to it on this channel. Yes, it is far-right. I mean, maybe it's right-wing in general. Let's say, like, there's definitely some far-right collaboration. They give away huge numbers of dog whistles to the far-right too. But as a channel, if you're just going to put it on a, is it left-wing, is it centrist, is it right-wing? Yes, it's definitely 100% right-wing. If you disagree, you're wrong.
Balance. We have all kinds of people on. I mean, Paul Sinner said it was homophobic. It's like, we have so many gay presenters. I mean, it's honestly, Andrew, it's
You can't
almost
move
too
for
many.
gay presenters.
I mean, yeah, that doesn't change the editorial line, though, does it?
It's ridiculous. And people have all sorts of responses. Daniela Nadge said that who cares about John Cleese? She's never watched GB and doesn't intend to, and she felt we should all know that. And I love this response. Someone had said, such a fantastic company. That's the level you've chosen for yourself. So I responded by saying, yeah, we've got Andrew Doyle, satirical genius author. We've got David Starkey, greatest living historian. Peter Hitchens.
David Starkey, greatest living historian. I'm sorry, have you mistaken him for Jacob Bronowski? Like, the guy who was on on Newsnight saying how the whites have become black, and that's why there's so much crime. Are you fucking joking?
Is one of our great
And
journalists.
Josh Howie.
And Josh Howie as well.
I didn't mention
Josh.
Yeah, there've definitely never been any far-right gay people. Like, I don't know, Milo Yiannopoulos?
Had to keep it credible.
For all this,
but the point is, we have a very high level, and thank you for the support.
But, you know, for all this, we've got to remember that Twitter isn't real life, and people are... There's also been a lot of people exclaiming how much they're looking forward to the show that we eventually produce. Well, I'll be producing, and John is going to be hosting, which we'll be making next year. And, you know, I find it fascinating that so many people these people are getting upset about a show that hasn't even been made yet, hasn't even been fully...
Oh, it's because we know that it's going to be terrible. That's why GB News have commissioned it, and the BBC said, no, we don't want to touch it, right? John Cleese was on fucking... He was on the Today programme on Radio 4 saying, well, I had to go to GB News because if I was on the BBC, they would censor me. Whilst saying that on the BBC, which is hilarious. Like, obviously, I could rag on this for ages, but we all know he means what he actually means is the BBC wouldn't commission the show that I wanted to do. Now, let's be real here. This isn't being cancelled by the BBC. This is not what's happened here. The BBC haven't said, you're not woke enough to be on our airwaves with the show that you've pitched to us here, John. What it actually is, well, it's first of all, it's him being able to generate, is what he might just be lying. Right? I might never have pitched any ideas to the BBC and just makes up I know people in the BBC, they're sick of how woke it is, and so I didn't even bother pitching this idea. It's not even actually being rejected by the BBC, it's just him thinking, he's him projecting onto the BBC what he thinks that they would do with the thing that he'd be pitching to them overall. So he's just essentially lying, and just the whole hashtag defund the BBC thing, which, whatever merits it may have, is still a really big kind of group of people as a kind of political action block. You have this kind of single policy block of people who hate the BBC or whatever. Yeah, the woke BBC who get people on who have manifestos where they say that they want to Minecraft all trans people. Yeah, that's how woke the BBC is. But again, another digression. But I think he's lying. I don't think he's ever pitched this to BBC. He's just assuming that they would actually commission this kind of show that he does. But essentially, it's about cancel culture and wokeism and modernity. So it is literally just Old Man Yells at Cloud the musical, really, at this point. But the issue really is that, you know, there's a reason why the BBC don't want to commission this stuff. It's because it's garbage. The BBC they're a publicly funded institution. They don't need advertising revenue. The only metric that they actually have to go on is ratings. Ratings is what drives BBC production at this point. They won't be able to get ratings. And some old guy ranting about how the young people are frustrating. That's not mainstream TV. That's wingnut shit. That's no mainstream, like, actual programming is ever going to want to pick up what John Cleese is putting down. And so why would they spend money commissioning it? And they have to be able to get things on at prime time slots, and they need to get millions and millions of people watching it to be able to hit the actual viewing figures that is essentially the metric that they're judged on how their programming operates and how successful it is. So some niche program about John Cleese ranting about the youths and the arguments that he's got on the Bird app. That's not. Why would the BBC commission this shit? The guy, in fact, he has such delusions of grandeur that whatever program that he feels like is going to be able to produce is so grandiose that essentially the flagship publisher of TV entertainment in the country should have taken up. They won't do because they're too woke, rather than because it's going to be really bad. Again, it's just delusions of grandeur at this point. But it's also worth pointing out as well. There is a reason why people like GB News, people like Talk TV are very happy to pick up people like Piers Morgan Uncensored, this new John Cleese show. Because as we've seen, people like GB News and Talk TV, their actual live ratings, garbage, in the trash. No one watches these things live. The actual reason why these channels exist, and they exist because these have all been funded by huge hedge funds like Legatum, like private equity funds, all that kind of, like Rupert Murdoch, who funds Talk TV. They're not chasing ratings. This is the key difference here, and why they're happy to produce wingnut stuff that is incredibly contentious, that drives engagement but doesn't drive ratings, is because they don't get people watching on terrestrial. They don't get people watching on TV. What this is does two things. They make their money off of YouTube clips. Like GB News, they publish a new YouTube segment every single day. They make hundreds of thousands of pounds a month just on YouTube AdSense revenue alone. Because that's what goes viral on YouTube. Contentious shit. People are getting angry about the flavour of the day. It's not mainstream. It's not going to get ratings on terrestrial, but it is going to generate huge amounts of ad revenue for you on YouTube. The second thing that it does is also creates viral social media clips because it's contentious. Contention drives engagement on social media. It doesn't on regular TV because people are just competing on a schedule. But when you've got thousands of posts coming at you every day on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever social media app of your choice is, it's always going to be those videos that are contentious enough that are going to grab your attention and get you watching, which does two things. It drives engagement and traffic to the actual institutions themselves, like Talk TV and GB News, who want to get you onto their YouTube channel, watching the ads and generating them AdSense revenue, which is where the vast majority of their actual money comes from, outside of the grants that they get given by these private equity firms and these investment banks and these hedge funds, all these people who have a vested interest in maintaining right-wing economic cultural hegemony over the populace, and that they're using social media to do it. That's why they want to drive the extra engagement, because they want to make sure that come the next election, people elect the Conservative government or they elect a Labour Party that is cut by capital, because they want to be able to maintain all those kind of manufactured consent economic precepts about what we should or shouldn't be prioritizing economically. There's a reason why Julia Hartley-Brewer continually goes viral on Twitter with clips of herself debating with people over whether or not we should be Minecrafting Just Stop Oil protesters with our cars, or whether or not we should be cutting taxes, or what the plan that the Conservatives have to be able to make things better for investors, and parroting the same kind of lines about anti-growth coalitions and growing the size of the pie, and creating these cultural narratives. No one watches that shit live on Talk TV. No one's tuning into Talk TV on their Freeview box. They're watching actual entertainment programming on the other channel. No one watches this stuff. But what they are doing is gaining viewership from people who are frantically on YouTube wanting to get angry about the latest woke thing that's the flavour of the day as far as the algorithm is concerned on places like YouTube and Twitter and Facebook and places like that. That's their business model. So they're very happy to get John Cleese. And then obviously he wants to be able to drive engagement, get contention out there into the social media space. So he starts ranting about how the BBC won't commission it. It's the perfect pitch for something like these people to be able to get that viral Twitter here. Like Piers Morgan's videos on Twitter, they get hundreds of thousands, millions of views because they're explicitly designed to go viral on social media because no one's watching them anywhere else.
The headline of that Guardian article talks about how it's John Cleese railing against cancel culture. That's not what the show is. They've just sort of decided this. It's very, very odd, isn't it?
Because now it's judgment goes across to association as opposed to content.
Right.
And that's the ever-expanding tribalism that we've seen over the last few years.
I would understand that if he was being associated with somebody who didn't have anything other than 100% garbage content, right? Maybe the show's going to be brilliant and I'm just wrong. And after months and months and months of continually garbage political and media output by GB News, and by Talk TV and all these other channels, right? The consistent horrendous programming and consistent right-wing messaging. Maybe this is going to be the one thing that's different, but I find that incredibly difficult to comprehend. It's like, again, we're not so. It's not, the association isn't GB, you're standing next to the bad people at GB News. It's GB News is bad, therefore they're going to produce more programming that is bad because that's their overall remit with the shows that they commission. So why wouldn't John Cleese's be any different? That's the issue.
On the left, who we're trying to get on, friends of comics who are friends of ours or whatever, people who rail against us, people who blocked us over the last year, and say, come on and just...
If there's someone from GB News who's watching this who wants to have me on to debate this shit, let's go. Bring me on. I'm happy to 1v1 me, but not IRL. Let's do it via webcam. I don't like leaving my house. If you want to have someone come on and debate, sure. But the issue is the framing, and the issue is the rest of the content, right? There's a person who I follow on Twitter, I'm actually good friends with, who's come on stream a couple of times. Their @ is Pig in Tea Break, which is an excellent reference, but it's called Jude anyway. He's regularly been on GB News, on actually Darren Grimes' show, Real Britain, where they have people who are students coming on to debate young people's issues. And there's consistently right-wing framing to these things, and Jude has to continue pushing back. At one point, Darren Grimes tried to get Jude to agree with him that everyone who comes out of university is as left-wing as Chairman fucking Mao, which is nonsensical. And then he will just give the other person on the other side of the debate he'll just give them the point to be able to make, but they can just agree. They say, here's the precept, do you agree with this precept? Oh yes, we also agree with the way in which you're trying to manufacture people's consent. Oh, isn't that weird how the people have the same ideology as the person who's presenting the show? Find it very easy in these debates, whereas he's very combative with the people who disagree with him. It's very strange that, especially considering the editorial line of the rest of the channel.
Just say your position. No, because they don't want to be challenged in any way, because they might have to actually think about these issues rather than just sprout the same old stuff to the echo chamber.
And also the guilt by association.
Well, I'm watching a channel now, mate. I'm watching a channel right now, and I'm just critiquing your shit. So, I said I've watched plenty of GB News, watched so much of their content. It's all garbage, it's all bad, it's all riddled with mistruth, it's full of propaganda, it's just like a manufacturing consent machine go burr. Like, the idea that people on the left are not engaging with this content is just nonsensical. We've all seen the clips on Twitter. And the fact is they continue just making nonsense claims with no basis in reality. People like Sophie Corker and Darren Grimes, they just spout nonsense shit, because that's their job. Their job is to create social media interaction and engagement. And you get much more engagement by saying something stupid and wrong, rather than something that is uncontentious, rather than something that is at least empirical or received wisdom, etc., etc. You want to create contention because that drives engagement and then drives traffic, and you do that by saying stupid shit. So it's not intellectual.
Of simply appearing on the channel, and that's the point. Like you say, it's the tribalism, very primitive tribalism. They don't engage their minds. It's the level of a sort of 5-year-old child. And what's hilarious is that as more and more mainstream figures come across to GB, they all get called far right. Eventually, the whole world's just going to be far right. I mean,
Well, I also have this disagree with this point where it's also different that it's a media organisation too. So the fact that it's explicitly someone who's marketing themselves as a news channel and a current affairs channel who have a consistent ideological editorial bias towards the right wing, where people are looking to news channels for objective journalism. There is nothing objective about what GB News do. They're just a propaganda channel at this point. So saying that they're right-wing and using that as a attack line against them, like, I happily debate with right-wing people, right? There's a difference between having a right-wing person on and them giving their viewpoint than an entire media echo chamber ideological sphere where everyone believes the same things and nothing is ever really challenged. Like, how many left-wing people are regulars on GB News? Is it just Benjamin Butterworth at this point? Even the token trade unionist is like a massive fucking reactionary piece of shit. And Benjamin Butterworth is just a liberal, an incredibly useless liberal as well. Even he was the one defending the bloody monarchy on GB News as well. Like, just shows how, like, even with the people they purport to disagree with, still buys into the same kind of hegemonic political viewpoints as they do, just kind of less so.
No, but for the far left, everybody is. If you're not a part of the Socialist Workers' Party, you are far right.
This is another question, though, isn't it?
And that's interesting. That one comment there is a really interesting look into their worldview, where they think that the people that are getting angry at them on Twitter are SWP members. Like, how many members are even in the SWP? Let me have a look. I bet you it's not even that many. Let me have a look. Socialist Workers Party UK on Wikipedia. Doesn't even show the membership. I bet you it's like less than like 5 figures. I mean, it's tiny membership in the SWP. But again, they're so in their, there's so much in their tiny little ideological bubble where they just believe that everyone attacking them is some kind of crazy leftist. When really, a load of the people who are attacking them are centrists and liberals, because that's how right wing they are. But they're so far to the right that they literally view everyone who disagrees with them as fucking anyone to the left of Pinochet as being like Trotsky.
Why is the comedy industry so captured by this weird kind of far-left, narrow-minded, I'd say it's infantile worldview? I mean, there's so many comedians now, people I used to respect, they can't think critically anymore. And they can only imagine...
Citation? I think you'll find that comedy as an industry has basically always been left-wing, and that's because left-wing people are on average smarter. Like, I hate to burst your bubble, I hate to be snobbish about this, but you know, like, if you're right-wing, you are statistically more likely to be stupid. And you can't argue with basic science. You know, facts don't care about your feelings, unfortunately. And to be comedic, you have to speak to power, first of all, right? Unless you're speaking to power, it's just bullying, right? It's just, which is incredibly low forms of humor. And to be able to make good, well-constructed jokes that aren't just fart jokes or slapstick, you have to be really smart. And unfortunately, right people are just stupid, and they can't critically analyze things. They can't critically analyze systems and critique them, which is what the funniest comedians actually do, right? But there's a reason why, you know, so much of right-wing comedy at this point, especially in the UK, has descended into being, you know, Roy Chubby Brown. That's what Ricky Gervais is, just Roy Chubby Brown for middle-class people. It's not even funny. There's no jokes. There's no punchline. Like, they've just become X minority is bad, and then they expect the rest of the audience to disagree with that and find that funny on its face. Like, if leftists were coming out and their entire shows were just lol capitalism bad, I'd have the same critique. But they're not doing that because these people actually have a functioning brain, unlike right-wing comedians. Name me a funny right-wing comedian. Like, you can't name it. Name me a good right-wing band. These are artless people. They can't properly critique anything, and that's why they fail at creating any art. There's no good conservative art. Like, in the comments when people are watching this segment later, name me a funny comedian who's right-wing, name me a good artist who's right-wing, and name me a good musician that's right-wing. You just cannot do it.
Imagine these demons of their minds to rail against, and all the things they say about us are just simply not true.
Yeah,
what's going on there? Why comedy?
And it's saddening because there are people like, and what we saw with Jerry Sadowitz over the summer being cancelled from the Pleasance, and how comics.
He flashed his penis at women in the audience. Like, I'm sorry, but again, or it's weird how these supposed fans of the free market are suddenly now raging at a private company's decision to want to protect its own revenues by not being associated with somebody who flashes his member at unsuspecting women. Like, I thought the whole trans panic stuff was because we were really scared about the potential for women to see male genitalia. But now, as long as it's now offending the wokies, it's all good. It's all good. Yeah, it's just a penis. It's just a penis.
Who in their own interests didn't stand up fully against that. People like Stuart Lee, people who are heroes of mine, comedic heroes.
Yeah.
And
if Stuart Lee is your comedic hero and you hold this opinion, then you are more stupid than you are bald.
It's cowardice. I think it's people either fighting for their own position.
But isn't comedy supposed to be about thinking outside the box?
Of course it is.
So why are so many comedians
Because the right wing is inside the box. It's not critical. It's not critical anyway. It's lowest common denominator shit. The only smart stuff you get is from the left.
going along with this group thing?
I heard an interesting theory that, you know, following the comedy boom in sort of the 90s, it just became a situation where there wasn't enough work to go around. It's actually quite competitive and hard to get work. So immediately, once it becomes an orthodoxy, everyone scrabbles around to prove they're the most adherent to it because there's not enough work to go around, and they can't risk being in the out group. Whereas, of course, it's better just accept you're in the out group.
I actually think it's partly laziness. I became a comic because I'm lazy. And I think you can then just go, I'm on the left, so I'm just a good human being, without having to actually think about and
I mean, that is, I will give this person this one point, and there's plenty of people on the left who fundamentally believe that they're a good human being because they're on the left, rather than understanding their own moral philosophy. That is, you remember we were talking earlier on in the stream about people who just think America must be bad, I'm a leftoid, therefore I will oppose anything that America does, because they don't have a moral philosophy that underpins it. Remember when there was the debate between Vorsh and non-compete, where non-compete was claiming that the material conditions will define for you what is moral and what isn't. And I'm like, no, you can't just use material conditions as like an answer for everything, or dialectics as an answer for everything to be able to, post hoc justify your own opinions. You have to have a moral philosophy backing this up. I'm a utilitarian, right? Okay, I just mentioned Vorsh, so clearly I'm a utilitarian, but similar kind of ethical structure at the very least, where you need to make sure you get the best outcomes in a material sense. And that's where my philosophy comes from as a materialist and as a Marxist. It's a part of my utilitarian understanding of moral philosophy. And so you analyze the material conditions through a utilitarian lens, and that's how you judge what is moral and what isn't. And too many people on the left think that being on the left is a moral position in and of itself, and then they refuse to properly understand that, properly build a moral foundation for that belief system, and therefore it is self-referential in their belief in their own positive morality, which they can't do because they've never properly had a basis for how they maintain their moral axioms and their moral precepts to begin with. And that is a really important criticism of the left. I need to bang on about this more, because it happens so much of the time, where morally lucky people who've just ended up on the left will then post hoc justify that political opinion by saying, well, I must be good, I'm on the left, rather than properly having an understanding of a moral philosophy to be able to ground where that political ideology has come from. And that's firmly why I'm a leftist, right? I believe you get better outcomes, and that makes people happier. That's a utilitarian belief as far as I'm concerned. And that's, again, I was saying previously as well, I commented on a Joe Politics video, that's the stealth meaning of what wokeism is. Wokeism is a charge directed by people on the right at people on the left who have a utilitarian worldview. That's the stealth thing that they really mean when they say wokeism. Because on the conservative side of a kind of moral compass, they actually believe in a bunch more different things that utilitarians wouldn't believe in. Things like purity, things like tradition, all that kind of stuff, which that doesn't enter into utilitarian moral philosophy. Tradition means nothing unless it's positive utility. Purity means nothing unless it has positive utility. And they can't fathom that overall lens. It's why they rail against things like diversity quotas or affirmative action, because they fundamentally believe in some kind of idealist principle where at the basis of everything there has to be some kind of agreed social structure which everyone adheres to. And I'm like, well, does there really? As long as you're getting better outcomes, as far as I'm concerned, through utilitarian ends, I couldn't give a shit, right? You can't have diversity quotas because that means the rules are different for everybody else. I'm like, does it get us better outcomes? That's all I care about. Show me where the worst outcomes come from, and I will change my mind on this stuff, right? And I think that you can make utilitarian analysis of things like diversity quotas and affirmative action, where you do see poor utility coming out of it, and I'll criticize it when it does. But the fact that people on the right will, without even analyzing the consequences, they will disagree with it on a kind of moral basis, on it not promoting, some kind of absolute equality, the way you treat people, rather than what we believe in, which is an equality of opportunity and equity within that regard, right? Because, people who come from poor backgrounds, people who come from rich backgrounds, they have a wild disparity in what they have access to as a child growing up, for example, in education, etc., things like that. But by having private schools, that means that by getting rid of private schools, as far as we're concerned, that would be more utilitarian, because it means that you stop separating people by how rich their parents are, giving more people access to better education, regardless of where they've come from. But people on the right would say, well, no, it's fair. Everyone gets access to a public school if you have the money. No one's barring these people from working, working as hard as they can to be able to afford the private school fees. But we understand that there is a material barrier in place, and that's what we want to be able to remove that barrier. Hey, thank you for the gifted subs. That is much appreciated, Boy Meets Mini. Thank you very much. The support is always appreciated. Thank you. But yeah, that's why I think that when people say woke, they really mean utilitarian. That's what they actually mean. Because they can't get their head around it, because it interferes with so many moral precepts they have that the left just do not care about, because it doesn't it's not congruent with utilitarian worldview.
Justify your position. So it's much easier to just go, rather than come on here or whatever, it's much easier to point at everybody else and go, they're right-wing, they're scum, keep them away, rather than actually having to read a book, which sucks. I've read like 3 books since I've joined this channel.
Yeah, and one of them was mine, right?
One of them, half of them was yours.
You read half the book. The best bit's at the end, Josh.
And he's right for that criticism. Like, no, it's Boy Meets Mini. I'll catch you on the next one. Hey, thank you. It's much appreciated, Boy Meets Mini. I think that's also a reasonable point, and that so much of the time they say the right wing is bad because it is bad. Absolutely, 100%. Like, you cannot make that point. Again, it goes back to what I say about them believing that they are good because they're on the left, rather than because they have poor policies or whatever. That's why when you say the Tories are scum, qualify it. The Tories are scum. I detest the Tories because 330,000 people lost their lives due to austerity. This was a poor outcome. It is worse. Things are measurably worse because the right wing were in charge. These are the kind of points you need to make, rather than just, well, right wing is a scum because we disagree with them, or because they are like metaphysically bad, right?
Oh, is that I just want to say here, it says here in the article, though, this from The Guardian, GB News, this is what they've finally relented, GB News has recovered to build a small but loyal audience. Thanks, guys. The best audience in the world.
I mean, The Guardian have clearly missed what the actual business model is there that I was talking about previously. It was Amal Raja speaking about on the Today programme, saying where he was approached, and I didn't know who they were. I don't know much about modern television because I'd be pretty much given up on it. I mean English television. Then I met 1 or 2 of the people concerned and had dinner with them, and I liked them very much. So he doesn't think they're a right-wing channel because they'd ever said they were explicitly right-wing, despite the fact he doesn't even know about the channel. He doesn't even really know about the channel at all, whereas the people who've actually interacted with it, who do pay attention to modern television, quote-unquote, we're all telling them he was right-wing. So, well, I've never heard of these people, but I had dinner with these guys. They definitely didn't seem right-wing to me. The guy who's clearly, brain has deteriorated to be reactionary boomer tier at this point. So, like, they don't know really what you can possibly say about this. We're working with Andrew Doyle, and when asked by Rajan about wokeism, something Cleese has shared his distaste of, and how big a threat wokeism is to the culture, he called himself an old-fashioned liberal. And again, that is, where this difference lies. There are loads of liberal views that are incongruent with the utilitarian moral philosophy, as far as I'm concerned, at the very least. Like, Jeremy Bentham was a liberal, but I do think that the modern understanding, even classical liberalism, like a lot of conservatives pretend that they espouse, directly conflict with, at least, a modern utilitarian analysis. Maybe not Bentham specifically, but he said in America, wokeism was worse. As in, the interesting thing is, the way woke people conduct the campaign is I thought, not very honest. He tweeted that GB News is sometimes referred to rather wittingly as KGB News, because it's influenced by Russian interests. I mean, I don't think it is. I think it's just funded by the Legatum Institute, like libertarian think tanks and hedge fund bankers who have investments in private healthcare firms. Responding to whether free speech should extend to those spreading opinions and misinformation about public health matters, Cleese said, if there's a factual response to something like that, then that should be made. That's the job, to put the facts out there and then to have opinions slightly separate, have a proper argument about it, but not try to avoid a public debate and try and get yourself through on social media. Actually, there's one thing I would like to respond to this. It's actually, I'm going to have to heap praise on someone who I actually really dislike, and that's Emily Maitlis, who was saying that, one of the things that you get from this desire to have every single viewpoint be represented, regardless of the actual veracity of the claims that they make, is because there has to be every single side represented, because that's what you should do, because that's the liberal opinion to have. But what that does lead to is you get this kind of false sense of balance that happens, right? It's almost kind of artificial balance on issues where there really shouldn't be, right? So, for example, misinformation around public health matters, as was questioned to Cleese on the radio, where something like, is the vaccine 100% safe, or should you get the vaccine, where 99% of the scientific community will tell you the vaccines are good, but there's 1% that doesn't. So what you do is you get one person on that doesn't, one person on that doesn't, they have a debate. But what that tells you is that it's not 99% and 1%. That tells you that it's 50-50. And it reifies a position with no factual basis. And do you think that the regular members of the public are going to be able to have enough workings of epidemiology or the nature of the science behind vaccines, that they're going to properly be able to critically analyze the debate that they're hearing between these two people? Of course they're not. And it's going to be, and as most debates are, it's going to be based more upon rhetoric than it is upon actual empiricism, because again, people aren't going to be able to properly engage with the facts anyway, because they're not virologists. So that's why there needs to be far more oversight, as far as I'm concerned, about things with regards to like public health matters. Whatever, say whatever offensive shit that you want. I actually really don't care, right? I really don't care how quote unquote offensive somebody is. But people are going to give you pushback. People are going to call you right wing or far right for these things that you say, and rightly so, because GB News is a right wing news channel, and their attempt to try and paint themselves as anything but. Again, it's just that's the way kind of our society is going, where the Overton window is, especially now all the left-wing economic positions of the Corbyn campaign have all been dropped, because they've been explicitly trying to be shut out of the conversation, because the media landscape just deliberately destroyed him, because it's not within their interest to have it, right? And so it's very easy now to say, oh, we want to be able to drown migrants in the Channel, and we want to make sure that we bring back the death penalty, and we want to make sure that people get deported to Rwanda. But we're the centre ground. We're just a free speech channel. We have no editorial line. What do you expect? Because again, liberals just fundamentally don't understand systemic bias and how it does or doesn't work, because they believe that everyone is A, acting in their rational self-interests, and B, is at least cognizant of their own biases, but they're not. They just aren't. And that's why liberalism is bad. I don't like liberalism. I'm not a big liberalism fan, me, on this channel. But yeah, just again, as I said, just a man ranting about how much he hates wokeism and cancel culture. This is nothing new. It's nothing groundbreaking. It's just another thing for them to be able to put onto YouTube to get hits and views and AdSense revenue from idiots who are happy to buy into a culture war, because it's a way that they can keep them on the right of politics against their economic interests. Again, just another divide and conquer thing. It's just another part of right-wing media hegemony. I go on about it all the time. That's the job of the press. Go read Manufacturing Consent. It's just a propaganda model. But yeah. John Cleese, I won't be watching this. I don't think many people are going to be watching this. Very few people actually watch GB News on TV, as I said anyway, so whatever. Again, just another guy who's having a end-life crisis, I guess. His brain power is clearly deteriorating, and he wants to be able to get angry about stuff on the Bird app. And clearly that's damaged his brain so much that he's now making a channel about how people on the Bird app trigger him. It's very much J.K. Rowling, right? Where she got triggered by people on the Bird app. She wrote a book about it, full of tweets. And I'm assuming it's going to be John Cleese bringing up tweets from 20 follower accounts that he thinks are wokeism or cancel culture, and getting performatively angry about it. It's not going to be good. It's going to be bad. But I will not be watching it, so we won't know. And if you're enjoying the content on future YouTube viewers, you can like, comment, and subscribe. You can click the bell. It'll notify you when I go live. You can become a member on YouTube for just 99p. Get you access to some of the emotes from Twitch. And you also follow my socials. They're on your screen right there. And more videos will be coming up on the screen right there as well. Thank you very much. I'll catch you on the next segment.